I have a thing for BMWs. Whether that's a good thing or not, I really like BMWs. But when I say that, I really mean I like 90s and early 2000s BMWs, because in my mind, that's when that brand peaked. Those are when the best BMWs were ever made. After that, I'm not going to say that they're terrible cars. There's been some good ones, and then there's been N63 powered BMWs. Another engine that I'm not particularly fond of, we're going to tear down today, and that is the BMW N20. It's a turbo 4-cylinder, and part of the reason I don't like this engine actually has nothing to do with the engine itself. It's that this replaced the N52 3-liter 6-cylinder that was naturally aspirated, which was a very good engine. And this is not quite as good as that. And that's part of the reason I don't like these engines. BMW's N20 is an all-aluminum 2-liter 4-cylinder. It's direct injected, turbocharged, and makes about 240 horsepower. And it makes quite a bit of torque, I think 285 foot-pounds, which seems pretty good for something that's this compact. And they do run pretty good. Now, they are kind of buzzy, and they're kind of noisy, and they also don't sound like a BMW is supposed to sound. Part of the other thing I don't like about these engines, but I'm not trying to sway you away from buying one of these, because if these are well maintained, these can be very good. The problem is, well maintained by dealers or manufacturer standards is not the same as actually being well maintained, because BMW recommended a 10,000 mile oil change interval on these engines. In my mind, that's too far. That's way too far. I'm not saying you should change your oil every 3,000 miles like you did in the 70s and 80s, but 10,000 miles, these are $4,000 to $5,000, $6,000 engines. Oil changes are significantly cheaper. Just a quick glance at this engine. There's a few things that stand out. Number one, the fuel rail. It is normally on the valve cover, but for some reason it's been pulled up. It's like a handle, like a stop handle. When the engine stops, you can grab it by this. The coils are also loose, and I don't see any connectors, which tells me this wasn't hacked out of a car or pulled out of a salvage car. This is likely a core return, but it does have some heat tabs on it, so maybe it's an actual return. There's a heat tab there, another one there. There's one on the block. There's also got a stock number written on the block. It's on the valve cover. It's on the computer. It's multiple locations on this engine. I think this was an engine that was sold and returned, or maybe they found a problem with it before it got shipped out and they decided to send it in as a core. There's also quite a bit of sediment on the low spots of the intake manifold, the valve cover. The coils look like they've been wet. This thing's been wet. I don't know if this is from a flood car, but it's clearly been wet. So we'll look for some water damage when we get this torn down. And all the prolific use of red caps, that tells me a salvage yard tried to sell this, or maybe they did sell it and it got returned. The first thing we're going to do is pull the ignition coils, which don't seem to be seated all the way down, so maybe the plugs aren't all the way in or they're the wrong coils. Pull the coils out, and then we'll pull the plugs out. Okay. Nope, the plugs are not all the way in. Well, it looks like the boot came off the coil, so coil's broken. Let's see if we can get this out. Well, I see how it's going to be. Piece by piece. It's perfect. Well, the pieces are getting bigger. I'm going to get an air nozzle and blow those pieces out so I can get that plug out. It's very clear this engine had water in it or on it, because this is all very rusty. I bet we're going to see some rust inside of this engine, but I don't see any damaged electrodes, no damaged straps, no malice in the combustion palace yet. Next, we're going to try to turn this engine over, see how it feels. Oh yeah, I can feel some rust in there. Uh-oh. Oh, that was just some more rust. We're just going to power through it all. Valves, rust, it doesn't matter. Well, at least I know we'll be able to take it apart. The next thing we're going to do is remove these fuel lines off of the injectors, the line off of the pump. We'll get the pump out of the way, and then we'll start pulling the injectors. Fuel's coming out of that. Gotta love the smell of old gas. This is the high pressure fuel pump. Still has fuel in it. Next, we're going to remove the valve cover. Looks like most of these bolts are already loose. So the front of it is very loose. Maybe I have to pull the vacuum pump off. That doesn't make any sense. We're still going to pull it off. Aha! So you need to pull the vacuum pump off to get the valve cover off because it goes all the way around this. Now this will probably just fall right off. Fall right off. Which one is... I think it's this one. Okay, I'm seriously running out. Upon first inspection, first glance, I can definitely see there's been some moisture in here, some rust and pitting on the camshafts. Well, I don't see anything horrific. The chain looks okay, but you can't really tell just by a glance. I don't see any broken plastic pieces. It's always a good thing to say about a BMW. Before I go any further, I'm actually going to remove the DME and the intake manifold. The DME is the engine computer, and then we'll get the intake manifold off, take a peek inside the intake ports. Now, these are actually worth some pretty good money. Look at the amount of dirt built up here on this intake manifold. Is that normal, you think? Or maybe a product of this engine's environment? Well, the intake ports aren't terrible. A fair bit of carbon and some debris, probably from when I pulled the intake. But I don't see anything awful yet. There's definitely been some water in here. You can definitely see we might be dealing with some rusty cylinder walls on that rear cylinder. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull these out. But to do that, we got to get the injectors out. So let's get those out first. I think these are all loose. Yep. Let's go ahead and knock these injectors out. So this tool works kind of like a mini slide hammer. They didn't really give you a long enough rod with this, I'll be honest. The rod is never long enough. But they come out. Well, that one had a bunch of water in it. More bolts down here? I don't know. Sure looks like there would be, but I guess not. If you're wondering why this valve train looks a little different than most of the engines I've torn down, this is BMW's Valvetronic System. This system came out in this engine's predecessor, the N52. It is also used in the N50 which is the 6-cylinder turbo version of this engine, and it is also used in some more recent BMW engines. This essentially controls the amount of air the engine sees by controlling the engagement of the camshaft. It uses this electric motor, which is controlled by the engine computer, which rotates this worm gear, which rotates this eccentric shaft. And that shaft pushes on these rockers to control how much camshaft the cylinder head actually sees. Now, we're not going to take any of this apart. I don't have the special tools that are required to do that safely. If you want to see me do it unsafely, watch some of my other BMW teardowns. But we're going to leave this complete. We're going to try to get all the head bolts out without taking any of this apart. Wish me luck. I've put the camera in what I think is going to be the best place for this. I've got a, well, first I moved this oil feed line, and I've got a 4mm chucked adapter. That's what we're going to use. And we're going to rotate the motor, which is going to rotate the eccentric shaft. Now, at a certain point, you start fighting the spring tension. And it looks like right at about this position is going to be the best for getting the head bolts out. I'm going to have to remove one of the stops for the eccentric shaft. But I'm pretty sure I can get the head bolts out this way. Probably have to remove this oil feed. It's not a big deal. But if I let go of this, it's going to zip back. So I'm going to slowly back off on this. I don't want it slamming shut. Okay, I just wanted to test that I could do that and kind of show you how this works. Here's another look at it. I'm going to go ahead and turn this again. All right, before we go any further, I actually need to strip the stuff off the front of this engine, remove these little access holes. Let's get this crank pulley out of the way. Now the thermostat. Boy, that looks like a high quality piece. Now we're gonna buzz these cam gears loose. Now behind these Allen-headed bolts, these are actually access holes for the timing chain system. So we're going to go ahead and remove those. What I mean is we're going to crack those loose. There's two there, and then there's one right here. Now we'll take the timing chain tensioner out. That was loose. Someone's been here. I'll get these broken loose. That does not fit, no matter how hard I try. This will work. You're caught on the sensor. And now we can get some of the timing components out of the way. There's the guides. It's like a cassette. It actually looks really nice. Before we crack the cylinder head bolts that surround the combustion chambers loose, we're actually going to remove all of the front bolts which seal the head to the front of the block here. The next thing I'm going to do is remove this stop for the eccentric shaft. That blocks access to the head bolt on this corner. Now we're going to start taking the head bolts out. We're going to start on the outside. I have to move the eccentric shaft depending on which bolt I'm taking out. This is a 55. Okay, so this is going to be kind of fun. I have an idea. So we're going to rotate this into the most desirable position, which is right here. And then we're going to take is that going to stay? I think that's good. That'll hold the eccentric shaft in position. so I can crack these head bolts loose. All right, now I think all of the remaining head bolts are the larger diameter T60s, so let's get those loose. Oh, we're gonna have to turn this exhaust cam into a different position. That's not too big of a deal. So the reason I have to do this is the high pressure fuel pump lobe is inhibiting me from putting the socket. It's got to stay right there. Now I can put the socket on the head of the bolt, and it's not at an angle. All right. So now, I would normally use the impact, but with all of the valve train in such close proximity, I'm not going to do that. So sorry, no taser sounds. We're going to just slowly turn this over with my power ratchet. Now, yes, I'm cheating. I'm using a 55 on a 60. It's fine. It's already loose. Let's see if we can get this all these head bolts out here. That one's going to stay. All right, now I'm going to gently release the Valvetronic motor so it can go back into its position. That was a little much. Okay. I think we're good. I think the head should just lift right off. Well, let's try it. I don't see anything else holding it on. Oh yeah. All right, head gasket, be nice. Head gasket looks okay. It's a perfect rail. Well, lots of goo. Lots of goo. This thing clearly sat with some water in it. Cylinder walls are really rusty, especially this cylinder here. I bet you that one is too. It's probably why it took so much effort to turn this engine over. Speaking of, I'm going to have to fish the chain out of there, but we're going to turn the short block over. Let's see if we can get this up here. So if I didn't fish the chain out, that chain would get all bound up when I try to turn this engine over. Okay, let's give this a whirl. I don't feel any deleted bearings. It's just really, really rusty. Check out the amount of rust in these cylinders, especially cylinder 2 right there. That's some super deep rust. They all have some. I guess cylinder 3 is probably the best condition of them all. And it's still not good. Well, at first, the head looks pretty ugly. Lots of corrosion and rust. Clearly, this thing had lots of water and stuff sitting inside of it. And at first, I thought those 2 intake valves were bent, and they might be. We're actually going to turn the Valvetronic motor over a little bit and see if we can't engage or close those valves. I think we should be able to do that. Let's see if I can find what I used to do that with. So let's see what happens here. Okay, well, that's opening them. Okay, So now we're going to rotate the cam and see if I can close those valves. I really want to know if those are bent. I don't think those are bent. No, they just closed. I can no longer see daylight through them. So I don't really think anything crashed inside of this engine. There's no marks on any of the tops of the pistons. There's no marks on any of the valves. It's just really dirty. I think my parts washer is going to have to clean this up before we can really assess the damage. And unfortunately, we broke a hinge off the door on our parts washer, so I can't do that tonight. All right, now we're going to turn this short block upside down. I got my pan in place because I don't trust that any of these engines are actually drained. It looks like this way will be easier. Well, that was very uneventful. Now we're going to pull the pan. As you can see, this was an all-wheel drive oil pan. Or maybe they're all the same, I don't know. I'm sure this will just come right off, right? Uh-huh. Blue. Oh my God, the smell. I could have gone without that. Well, the inside of the pan has something that you would kind of call oil. It's like water and oil. It's all over my floor. But I don't see any chunks of metal. I don't see any sparkly bits. There's no forbidden glitter in here. That's just rough casting there. It just looks like it got some water in it and it sat for a while. The first thing I noticed when I pulled the pan, besides the fact that it pooped all over the floor, is that this oil pump is the biggest oil pump for the smallest engine I've ever seen. Now, I'm sure there are bigger pumps, and I'm sure there are smaller engines, but the size of this pump compared to the size of the engine is astounding. Again, I've never really had a pan off an N20, so this is interesting to see. Unfortunately, we're not going to take this apart because it turns out this assembly is worth quite a bit of money, and if I take it apart, I promise all the parts will fall out and I won't know how to put it back together. So I don't want to do that, but that is a giant oil pump, so let's figure out how it comes off. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is try to get this chain off. So we got a couple T30s. I don't really know what that did for me. Is this going to shoot this off? Please don't shoot this off. Please don't shoot this off. Yeah, it just fired part of a tensioner. I'm probably going to shatter this plastic cassette here because it doesn't matter. Oh wait, I think I see what to do. I think it's supposed to go the other way, but we're going to go this way with it. But I think I'm just going to cut this chain. I don't really want to try to take this out. I don't really want to use an impact on it, and I don't know how to lock this pump up where it wouldn't damage the pump trying to get this out with a breaker bar. So we're just going to remove it complete by cutting the chain. Now these rusty old bolt cutters were my grandfather's, and they haven't lost to a chain yet.
Come back.
Well, this isn't really cutting through it, so maybe I just can't get a good angle on it. Plus these blades are, they've got 50 years of wear on them or more. Probably 70 or 90, I don't know. Some number greater than I. Well, we're almost through it. This engine stand needs brakes. Hate to waste a chain, but got to do what you got to do. Now it looks like to get this off, I've got a T30 here, and the rest they look like E10s or E12s. Let's remove this unit. Well, that's a unit, all right. Now, on the bottom side of this, you can see there's some oil deposits, but it's not terrible. I don't see anything too awry in here. None of these are a different color than the rest of them, which tells me that I don't think any of these have been overheated or spun a bearing. But we won't know until we get them cracked loose. So I'm going to turn this over to where these two are at the top and 1 and 4 are at the bottom. That way I can get all 4 out at the same time. And then we'll remove this bed plate and pull the crank. Now you always want to start at the front. It's way more hygienic to go front to back. First one. Now, I doubt these will just push right out, but we're going to try. No, not even a little. Now, normally this is the part of the video where I'd use the end of my destroyed Mac Tools hammer to knock the rods and pistons out, but one of my viewers, Brian Patton in Ontario, was kind enough to send me a brass drift punch. This is the proper way to do it. I don't always do things the right way. I'll be the first to admit it. But he sent me this brand new drift punch from Wild Tools. What does this say? Warning, cancer and or reproductive harm. I don't know about cancer, but reproductive harm. Time to break this in. I don't want to go shooting these things out of the block. Oh, they're still pretty tight in there. Well, we're getting close to the top of the bore. That rust is really making this fun. Well, that is ugly. That took some effort. I'm actually going to turn the crank over, see if I can use the crank to push this to the top of the bore. It might be a little easier. Thanks, Brian. That thing works like a champ. The bearings tell a little bit of a story here. This top shell is worn through 2 layers of metal to the third. Now, will that make noise? I really don't think it would, but it might. It really just would depend on the amount of oil pressure these engines run. And it's pretty consistent in every single cylinder. Now, this could have been a higher mileage engine. It's hard to say. I don't really have a story with it. But one thing is important, that there's no gouges, no grooves. It doesn't look like any metal was run through this. These just look like higher mileage bearings to me. Now the rods and pistons, well, the pistons that came out of the bores that weren't filled with rust aren't too bad, but there's a little bit of skirt wear here. It's not terrible. Cylinders like this are worse, and the rings are stuck in the ring lands. It's pretty ugly, but you know, it could have been done because this engine sat outside. There's a little bit more wear there. But there's no marks on the top of the pistons. It doesn't look like it ingested anything. None of these look bent to me. I think this was simply from how it was stored. Now it's time to crack these main cap bolts loose, and then the rest of the surrounding bed plate bolts. Sure, there's a place to pry. That really wasn't too bad. Now it's time to lift the crank out. See if we can... Oh my gosh, water came out of that. Well, the bed plate looks okay. All these main bearings, no discernible wear. And the upper main bearings look pretty good as well. I don't see any damage to the thrust bearing. Nothing jumping out at me. And lucky for me, it looks like the crankshaft is in pretty good shape. I don't see any torn up journals. It'll definitely need to be checked by a machine shop, but it certainly looks like a serviceable part. Well, the bores are pretty rough, mainly from the rust. I don't see a lot of other damage in them. There's nothing sticking out at me. It's hard to say whether the vertical scratches in here are from removing the pistons with the rust in the cylinders or pre-existing. Well, there was no smoking gun. No definitive answer as to what was wrong with this engine. The water or moisture that sat inside of this engine could have easily masked whatever was wrong with it. It could have had low compression. Maybe it burned oil really badly. Maybe it failed an oil consumption test. We didn't get a turbo with this engine, and maybe the turbo was bad. I've seen other BMW engines returned as defective, but in fact, it was the turbo all along. We've seen it on the channel. There is a green lining here, though. I got a lot of really good parts to sell. N20 parts are not cheap. The crankshaft, the cylinder head, the oil pump, I'll do pretty well. I know you guys like seeing your carnage, but it feels good sometimes to do well on a core. I do hope you enjoyed this teardown. If you'd like to buy parts off of this engine or any of the other engines I've torn down, you can visit Importapart.com or you can email us at importapartsales@gmail.com. If you go to our website and you don't see what you're looking for, there is a request form on the site that emails us exactly what you're looking for. You may see a video on this soon. This is my 5.3 swapped LX450. It's been done for a couple years now, and I've put several thousand miles on it, and I think it's time for an update. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one.